Before we dive in, I thought it would be helpful to align on what a nutritionist's role is in supporting someone, because I'm sure that some of you here are very familiar with a nutritionist and maybe less so. So a nutritionist's job is to look at someone's challenges related to illness or symptoms, or to help with physical performance, mental health, or overall well-being, broadly through the lens of food. And a tenet of my practice as a nutritionist is to make sure that my client knows what they're doing and why they're doing it. And so I really like to say there is no right way to eat. There's just a lot of helpful strategies depending on your athletic goals or your individual needs. And today we're going to be diving into this connection around performance, specifically around menstrual cycles. Understanding how to support our bodies through these natural fluctuations can make a real difference in the energy that you have, how you perform, how well you recover, whether you're an athlete or just trying to feel your best day to day, month to month. I am a mom of 2 young kids and an athlete myself, so I understand that it is tough to think about eating and preparing nutritious foods in the chaos of professional obligations and personal life. That said, information is power. I think it is notable and astounding that between 2014 and 2020, across more than 5,000 papers in the 6 top leading sports science journals, only a third of the participants were female. Only 6% of the studies were conducted exclusively on females. And our diet is a mixture of complex social, cultural, environmental, physiological, psychological factors. And just to be clear, there is no consensus on the role that menstrual cycle plays in this whole ecosystem. Menstruation is a critical biomarker of overall health. And I will be the first to admit that that was not something I was raised knowing or understanding. It is a critical biomarker, especially for active women. And there is emerging research and great ideas about how to eat and perform for your cycle. And so to understand that research, I think it's important to first understand foundations of the nutrients that we are eating. So macronutrients. This is what you eat, what it's made of, and how that fuels you. And carbohydrates are your body's quick source of energy. And these aren't unfamiliar words. Carbohydrates, proteins, fats, we've all heard these. We've seen these on nutrition labels. Let's talk just a little bit about how they relate to performance and how they relate to menstruation and how they just are broadly supporting and fueling your body. As a quick energy source, carbohydrates provide that energy to your cells, your tissues, your organs. Carbohydrates, as I'm sure you know, come from foods like breads and pasta. They also come from fruits and vegetables. Your body breaks down carbohydrates into sugar and then stores what you aren't using for fuel later on, stores it as glycogen. Protein is crucial for your body's repair and growth. And while carbohydrates are our primary fuel source of energy, proteins can be used for a secondary source, particularly during long runs when glycogen storage is depleted. Protein comes from foods like beans, eggs, tofu, nuts, chicken. Protein notably plays a role in regulating hormones like insulin and cortisol, both which are critical for your energy management and recovery. Protein supports muscle protein synthesis, and you're going to hear me talk a little bit about this really important process in the presentation related to hormonal health too. Muscle protein synthesis is this process where your body is repairing and building muscle fibers after exercise, because there's this tear repair system. When you work out, your muscle fibers are tearing, and the muscle protein synthesis is helping to make those muscle fibers thicker and stronger when you're returning to that activity next time, next week, next month. So it helps to build those muscle fibers using the amino acids from the hopefully high quality proteins that you're eating. Healthy fats fuel endurance, sustain energy for longer runs, and are really powering you through these intense workouts you might be doing. Quality fats play a key role in hormone production, which is crucial for maintaining a healthy menstrual cycle. Fats help your body absorb the vitamins that you're eating, whether through your diet or through supplements, and are vital for bone strength and muscle recovery. Also vital for not having a mid-afternoon crash. So when I talk to younger athletes, I might talk about making sure they have adequate fat in their diet to really sustain them through, that 2 p.m. to 3 p.m. part of their day between meals. Some great fat sources: avocados, nuts, seeds, olive oil, fatty fish like salmon, sort of this Mediterranean diet profile, which has been very studied, full of really quality fats. And I'd be remiss to talk about nutrition without discussing hydration. And my favorite way to frame how hydration or food or nutrients affect our body is this. So zooming way in, your cells make up your tissues, like muscle tissue, connective tissue, your nervous tissue. Those tissues make up your organs, like your heart, your liver, your brain, your stomach. Those organs make up organ systems, like your circulatory system, your digestive system. You actually have 11 different systems in your body. Those organ systems all work together to maintain a level of homeostasis, which is a stable internal environment, allowing our bodies to function as a whole ecosystem. So your cells rely on water to remove waste, to transport nutrients, oxygen, and hormones to other cells in your body. And zooming out, the big picture here is that for performance, hydration helps regulate your body temperature. And this is so fascinating for females. When I get into this menstrual cycle a little bit, I'm going to explain to you how your body temperature, your core temperature actually fluctuates with your hormone shifts. Hydration regulates body temperature, it maintains your energy level, and it supports muscle function, notably preventing fatigue and cramping. Adequate hydration flushes out excess sodium, it reduces swelling, and your blood, which is about 90% water, delivers oxygen and nutrients more efficiently to our tissues, which can ease menstrual cramps and muscle tension around your cycle. So I can't really underscore this piece of hydration enough when I talk about this broad picture of nutrition. So let's align on what menstruation is. Menstruation is the monthly shedding of the lining of your uterus. The menstrual cycle is driven by hormones. So hormones are these chemical messengers in your body that control important processes like growth, energy, mood, how your body handles stress. And a normal menstrual cycle can last anywhere between 21 to 35 days, though the average tends to be about 28 days. And this picture on the screen is reflecting an average menstrual cycle with some images around what's happening during this. In an average menstrual cycle, a woman loses an average of 2 to 3 tablespoons of blood over about 4 to 8 days. Again, these are broad windows and ranges because normal can take a lot of different pictures for menstruation. Some women lose closer to 5 or 6 tablespoons, and that's considered a heavy menstrual bleed, is fairly common and affects about a quarter of the female population. So the reason menstruation occurs is to prepare our bodies for pregnancy. And each month, the ovaries release an egg, and if that released egg isn't fertilized during ovulation, the lining of the uterus sheds. Menstrual bleeding lasts 2 to 7 days. For the first few years after menstruation begins, for younger females, longer cycles are common. However, menstruation tends to shorten and become more regular with time. Your menstrual cycle might be very regular. It might happen at the same time every month. It might happen for the same length every month, or somewhat irregular. And we'll talk a little bit about those irregularities. Your menstruation might be light, it might be heavy, it might be painful, it might be pain-free, it might be long, short, and all of that can still be considered typical. The question I would pose would be, what's typical for you? Having a baseline understanding of your cycle, your symptoms, your performance as it relates to your cycle, having a baseline to bounce future data points off of can be really helpful to know what's changing for you, what changed compared to last year, last month. That baseline is something that I'll talk a little bit about, having a helpful data point. And I want to highlight, in talking about menstruation, it would behoove me to highlight the many, many irregularities that might occur. And there are a lot of reasons that these irregularities can occur. Some are on this page, some are not on this page. But some reasons that menstrual irregularities might happen are for short-term reasons like pregnancy or breastfeeding when menstruation ceases for a period of time. Other reasons may be chronic and longer lasting, affecting not just menstruation, but overall health. Nutrition-related conditions like anorexia nervosa or disordered eating patterns, that can cause a significant drop in body fat, which can disrupt that balance of hormones needed to maintain a regular menstrual cycle. Excessive exercise can also alter your hormone production, which can cause irregular periods or amenorrhea, which is the absence of menstruation, because the body will be prioritizing other functions over reproduction. Polycystic ovary syndrome, which is PCOS, endometriosis, pelvic inflammatory disease, hypothyroidism. These are conditions that, while distinct, all share overlapping pathways, such as inflammation, hormone imbalance, metabolic dysfunction. And this is where nutrition can really play a crucial role. Disruptions to the menstrual cycle, such as irregular periods or amenorrhea, that's the absence of menstruation, often signal issues like low energy availability. Low energy availability is often referred to as LEA, L-E-A. It can signal excessive training, it can signal stress, and all of those things can negatively affect performance and long-term health. And I want to talk about relative energy deficiency in sport, because when I am asked to discuss menstruation at all levels as female athletes, we should have on our radar this concept. It was previously referred to as the female athlete triad. Over the last 10 years, this has really shifted from this triangular triad, which was sort of a reductive view of limitations as it relates to energy and performance. It's grown to be this broader syndrome of relative energy deficiency in sport, RED-S. But first, I want to talk about something that precedes RED-S, and that's LEA, this low energy availability. Basically, it means that your system is not getting enough to support both your training and your basic biological needs. Underperformance due to LEA may not always be noticeable. You might feel depleted, or you might not feel depleted, and you might not notice that your training has suffered from inadequate fueling. Essentially, LEA is the condition that triggers this broader syndrome of RED-S. And for athletes, ensuring adequate energy intake is key to both preventing LEA and the related health issues that fall under RED-S. And while LEA might be this underlying cause, RED-S is this broad range. So I want to talk about some of the common presentations of RED-S and this intersection of LEA and RED-S and why it can be hard to detect. So first common presentation, delayed or irregular growth and development. So low energy availability, LEA, can hinder growth. And this probably isn't surprising. But it's a noteworthy detail for females because absent menstruation, amenorrhea, or delayed onset of menstruation means not having a menstrual cycle or having a delay in the onset when you're younger. This is a hallmark sign of low energy availability. And for young athletes here or for parents of young athletes, this is an important one. primary amenorrhea happens when menstruation doesn't begin at all by about 15 or 16 years old. And in the context of Red S for young female athletes, low energy availability, so inadequate fuel, can delay the onset of menstruation. Secondary amenorrhea is if a female has had regular periods and then stops menstruating. So in Red S, this occurs because the body's energy is redirected away from non-essential functions like reproduction to prioritize basic functions and the demands of exercise. So second presentation of Red S, fatigue and decreased performance. It's helpful to have a baseline understanding of what your performance looks like so that you have this data point, a subjective data point, to bounce future data points off of. You then can sort of gauge fatigue and decreased performance, these nebulous presentations, if you're able to look back at what you are doing when you are properly fueled, when you are exercising at what feels like an appropriate level. Third presentation, recurrent illness and infections. And listen, we're coming up on flu season, so I'm not implying that exercise compromises immunity necessarily. And let me explicitly say, regular exercise is beneficial for immune function, but intense exercise or prolonged exercise without adequate recovery or nutrition suppresses immunity. And that leaves your body more vulnerable to infections and illness and a slower recovery from illness. Fourth presentation, mood changes and cognitive decline. Irritability, mood swings, depression. These are signs of physical exhaustion and hormonal imbalances. I've also seen it present with difficulties in concentrating and anxiety. And I am not here to say that irritability means malnourishment. Again, hopefully a data point can sort of give you something to refer to. You've all heard and probably experienced this colloquial idea of hunger. So you know that being hungry can make you irritable. And I think one of the most interesting connections between mood and nutrition is this idea of your gut being referred to as a second brain. You have a nerve that actually starts in your brainstem and ends in your large intestines. That nerve, the vagus nerve, is like this communication highway between your brain and your gut. And it helps to regulate digestion, heart rate, stress levels, and good nutrition supports the vagus nerve by providing the nutrients needed for healthy gut function, which sends positive signals back to your brain. When your gut is healthy and getting the right macronutrients that we talked about, those quality carbohydrates, quality proteins, quality fats, it can work better to reduce your stress, physical and physiological stress, and your mood. The last two presentations I want to talk about disordered eating behaviors. And while this is not present in all Red S cases, those experiencing Red S may show signs of restricted eating, also sport dependent. So for females that are in sports where body weight influences performance, Red S may include that restrictive eating profile. And that might be happening either consciously or subconsciously, reducing caloric intake. And the sixth presentation is increased injury risk. Red S can lead to stress fractures, frequent injuries, delayed healing. And this is particularly due to weakened bones from low bone mineral density. And just like those macronutrients that we talked about fuel your muscles and your bones and a healthy menstrual cycle, not enough of those macronutrients compromises the muscles, the bones, and menstruation. So as we dive into micronutrients, the beauty of what I get to do is to tailor dietary protocols and sometimes supplement protocols to the individual that I'm working with. And in thinking about this intersection between performance and menstrual health and nutrition, I wanted to pick out a few nutrients to highlight as what I think to be logical focus areas. Omega-3 fatty acids. These healthy fats reduce inflammation, support hormone balance, and may even alleviate menstrual cramps. They support and promote muscle recovery after exercise, which is really critical for performance. Sources are salmon, sardines, and I think it's cool that the highest plant sources are flax seeds, chia seeds, and hemp hearts. And if I ever were to start my own business, I would start just like selling a mixture of those three because I think they're an easy addition to like granola, your smoothies, your overnight oats. Just scooping a spoonful of that trifecta mixture is great. Second one are B vitamins, specifically B6, B9, and B12. And these vitamins are essential for energy production. So when you kind of think about B complex vitamins, you can think about energy production. They manage mood swings, menstrual symptoms. They support red blood cell formation, which is key for oxygen being delivered during exercise. Sources of some of the Bs: leafy greens, eggs, legumes, chicken, fortified cereals, and breads, because in the US, we're actually required to add certain B vitamins to foods like cereals and breads. If you ever see like niacin on all the bread you eat, this is one of the reasons. Vitamin D. Low levels of vitamin D, maybe unsurprisingly, impact bone health and lead to fatigue. So vitamin D is vital for supporting muscle function and therefore reducing injury risk. That bone mineral density is really tied in here. Some of the research that I've looked at suggests that up to 40% of the US population is deficient in vitamin D. And as female athletes, especially those training indoors or in northern latitudes, they might be particularly vulnerable because they're not getting as much sun exposure. Sources for vitamin D: fatty fish, salmon, egg yolks, fortified food like cows and plant-based milk have vitamin D enriched products. Interestingly, I think the coolest vitamin D fact is you can actually put mushrooms in the sun and they will absorb more vitamin D. Magnesium tends to be lower during menstruation because your body produces hormones, estrogen and progesterone, and the higher these levels, the lower your magnesium levels. So magnesium is going to be used for like menstrual cramps, muscle relaxation, which you might know from taking an Epsom salt bath before. And the good news about magnesium in the diet is that it's in foods everywhere. Anything that contains dietary fiber probably provides some level of magnesium. But processing foods, like refining grains, is a way that we lower the magnesium content of food substantially. So when I'm talking about those high quality carbohydrates, the whole grains, that's one of the reasons, is because eating it in a stone ground whole grain form allows more nutrient content. Also dark leafy greens, almonds, cashews, pumpkin seeds. Iron, this might be the least surprising one that I bring up because blood loss from menstruation depletes iron stores. Iron is crucial for delivering oxygen to muscles, preventing fatigue, especially for female runners. If you have heavy bleeding during your period, iron levels might be consistently low. And the women who I work with who follow plant-based diets also need to be a bit more thoughtful about iron, since plant-based foods contain non-heme iron, which may be less readily absorbed, less bioavailable. If you are somebody with IBS, ulcerative colitis, or any condition that affects the gut, you may have a compromised ability to absorb nutrients because a lot of nutrients are absorbed in the small intestines. And you might need to be more mindful, not just about iron, but a nutrient-dense diet and potentially supplements to support that individual profile if you have compromised absorption. And last but not least, calcium and zinc. So calcium, while it's known for bone health, is also important for nerve function and muscle contractions, which I think is an under-discussed part of calcium, including the muscles in the uterus. So having adequate calcium can actually help to reduce menstrual cramps. Obvious sources of calcium: dairy, also leafy greens, almonds, amaranth. The grain is a great source of calcium. And just like the B vitamins, plant milks or juices are often fortified with calcium. Okay, zinc supports hormone balance, crucial for immune function. It also plays a role in managing menstrual symptoms like cramps and bloating. And maybe at this point you're like, why don't I just take supplements of all of these all the time? Supplementing can be a meaningful route to supporting health and addressing your symptoms. In the case of zinc, though, excess zinc can interfere with the absorption of other minerals like copper and iron. So all to say that any supplementation of any nutrient should be strategic. And my favorite zinc-rich food is pumpkin seeds because they're really high. They're like the highest content of zinc, but they're also high in magnesium. They're a great snack, so get those pumpkin seeds in there too. Okay, let's shift. I want to talk about just the phases of menstruation. So we talked about what it is, what it does. So let's just jump into kind of segmenting this by week. And again, because menstruation is so personal, Yours might not be exactly what these very average photos and what these ranges say, so keep that in mind. The first week of the menstrual cycle is when menstruation occurs. And remember, that's the body shedding the uterine lining. And this phase is marked by low levels of both estrogen and progesterone, leading to less hormonal fluctuations. And because the hormones are at their lowest, this is the time in the cycle when the body experiences the least amount of physiological strain. And interestingly, the lower hormone profile of this phase allows for better physical performance. We tend to feel stronger, and perceived exertion tends to be lower, meaning the same workout might feel easier compared to other times of the month. Our body handles heat better during this phase. So this is an ideal time for high intensity training or those high intensity runs. Nutritionally, iron intake is critical during this phase because of the blood loss during menstruation. It's also a great time to increase quality carbohydrates because the body can process and use carbs more efficiently. You might be asking yourself, what? Why? And this is because the lower level of estrogen and progesterone, those hormones, improve your insulin sensitivity, which allows for more efficient absorption and storage of glucose as glycogen, and that's the body's primary source of quick energy. Okay, so week 2, late follicular phase. In this phase, estrogen levels begin to rise while progesterone remains low. The increasing estrogen supports muscle recovery and improves energy availability, which is why you might feel more energetic and focused. Remember, before estrogen surges, the body's core temperature is at its lowest, which helps you stay cooler during your workouts. So hormonal fluctuations are starting to influence energy and recovery, but overall the body is still really primed for performance. As estrogen rises, it directly impacts strength and endurance. This means you're in a great position to push for high intensity workouts or longer endurance sessions with faster recovery times. And we still see a lower rate of perceived exertion, meaning workouts feel easier. And cognitive focus is high, so this is an ideal time for both mental and physical performance. Nutritionally, our bodies can still use and store carbs more efficiently. And since your body's primed for intense exercise, this is a good phase to refocus on things like hydration and electrolytes to maintain fluid balance. All right, I'm going to jump to ovulatory, and I think it's important to note, like, I'm breaking these out into 4 sections, but we aren't in a vacuum. Like, day to day, these transitions can feel slow and not notable. This is big picture, kind of zooming in. Ovulatory window is small, day 13 to 15. And during the ovulatory phase, estrogen peaks. The luteinizing hormone LH is surging. This is what triggers ovulation, the release of the egg from the ovary. Testosterone peaks during ovulation, which may increase strength. After ovulation, progesterone levels begin to rise, which is preparing the body for a possible pregnancy. So this is a peak time for strength and power. Estrogen boosts muscle function and recovery. However, with these benefits comes this increased potential for injury, particularly to the joints, because we have heightened laxity and changes in the neuromuscular control caused by these hormonal fluctuations, which is all to say that it's important to stay mindful of form, always. But when I work with clients who are leveraging their cycle, I may be focused on mobility more in the follicular phase, while leaning into performance and personal PRs during the ovulatory and luteal phases. During ovulation, it's crucial to prioritize protein intake to support that muscle protein synthesis that I talked about. And your body's primed for strength gains. So increased carbohydrates will help to fuel the intensity of the workouts and replenish those glycogen stores. The body is still very efficient at utilizing carbs during this window, so keep the focus on both fueling and recovery. And then lastly, this luteal phase. So this is days 15 roughly to 28. Obviously, if you had a shorter or longer cycle, that would shift. The luteal phase, progesterone peaks while estrogen remains moderately elevated. These hormonal changes cause an increase in core body temperature by about 0.5 degrees Celsius. And you might be like, that's nothing. But think about it. Your body's 98.6 degrees. Your body likes that homeostasis, the internal stability. So 0.5 degrees can actually have a significant influence on how you feel about exercising in the heat or in the cold. This increase in body temperature can really impair your body's ability to cool down efficiently, delaying the onset of sweating, increasing the rate of perceived effort, especially if you're exercising in hot conditions. You might also notice fluid retention, slower digestion, slower gut motility, decreased insulin sensitivity. And this all leads to some of those common symptoms like bloating, mood swings, fatigue. And from a training perspective, this is an appropriate time to prioritize recovery, allowing for more rest days or incorporating activities like yoga, stretching, mobility work that reduces the stress on your body. And since recovery may take longer nutritionally, the biggest challenge during this phase is managing inflammation, which is often heightened due to these hormonal fluctuations. So prioritizing protein intake can really support that muscle protein synthesis, which is still important even if you're scaling back on the intensity of the workout. And although insulin sensitivity decreases, it's essential to maintain quality carbohydrate intake to fuel workouts and help with that glycogen replenishment. Those anti-inflammatory foods to support inflammation would be like those omega-3 ones, leafy greens, berries, salmon, foods that are colorful, high in polyphenols, flax seeds. I thought this chart might be helpful if you're thinking big picture, how to structure fueling across the phases of menstruation from a caloric standpoint. Keep in mind, this chart does not account for your training or your activity level. So that would be another layer maybe to consider when looking at it. But generally, in the follicular phase, no significant increase in calories are required. And I say this with a huge caveat of it is training dependent. Women may feel they need fewer calories during this phase due to a lower appetite and better energy management. As estrogen peaks around ovulation, energy levels in the body may require a modest increase in caloric intake. During the luteal phase, that second half, progesterone levels peak, leading to a higher basic metabolic rate and increased energy needs. So some studies that I've read estimate that energy expenditure can rise between 2 to 10% during this phase, and that's equivalent to about 1 to 300 calories per day. Many of the women that I talk to are like, yeah, I have more cravings for higher calorie, carbohydrate-rich foods in my luteal phase. And this might be reflective of your body's need for extra energy and fuel for glycogen replacement. My hope is that in you seeing this chart validates what you might already know, but that by seeing this, you could think more strategically about how you could fuel yourself in the follicular versus the luteal phase. How do I figure out my cycle? How do I figure out my nutrition needs relative to my cycle? So I wanted to put together a slide that showed some ideas for how you might even begin to craft telling your own story. Wild AI, that's a specialized app designed specifically for women who are athletes who have active lifestyles. It tracks not just your menstrual cycle, but also provides insights on how to optimize like your training and your nutrition based on your hormonal profile. Clue tracks menstrual cycles, but also symptoms and mood and energy levels. Chronometer is one of the ways you could track your macros. Some of these, like you've probably heard of MyFitnessPal, Autocracy. These are designed to help you track those carbohydrates, proteins, and fats, just to get an idea. And I don't have all of my clients track everything all the time, but it can be really helpful to track for like a week, over the course of a weekend when you're training, to just get a glimpse of like, are you eating 50 grams of protein? And really you should be aiming for, if you're doing a gram per pound of ideal body weight and you're 130 pounds and you're only consuming 50 grams of protein, you might really want to bump up your protein intake, but you'll never know that unless you get a sense of where your macros are to begin with. And the ones on the right, Garmin, Whoop, Apple Watch, these are different ways that you can track your fitness level, your activity. And some of them have some interesting integrations with menstrual cycle, like Fitbit integrates with Strava, and it offers menstrual cycle tracking within the app. I don't think there's a perfect solution, unfortunately. So there's more to be done in this space as more research is done on women with women as the primary participants. I thought it'd be helpful also to have this page as a nutritional summary for each of the phases that I talked about. And while this summary offers some key insights, it's important to acknowledge that we're just scratching the surface of understanding how menstruation impacts athletic performance for females. And despite the growing body of research, there's a lot more to uncover about the physiological nuances of us as female athletes. One of the core principles in my practice is ensuring that women I work with deeply understand their physiology and are empowered to make informed decisions about how they're fueled and how they're taking care of themselves. I have two answers here. One, I think it's a good starting point to know how much water you're drinking day in and day out. So you can get a sense of 8 to 10 glasses of water per day is a fair average to aim for. Now that's going to be dependent on a lot of things. If you eat a diet full of well-hydrating foods like fruits and vegetables, I don't necessarily think that you have to urgently drink 10 glasses of water per day. If you're somebody who is working out outside, sweating more, your body weight is dropping after you exercise, you could get a bit more scientific about it and do a pre-weigh, a post-weigh, and then use that. There's so many online calculators now where you can look at what your weight loss was pre and post, and then use that to calculate your more specific water needs related to your sport performance. And then I didn't talk too much about electrolytes in this, but to the question of hydration, it's not just water, it's also replenishing some of the sodium and the potassium that you would get from different supplements or electrolyte-rich hydrating fuels. So yeah, I guess without getting too deep into it, broad answer is you can look at how much water you're drinking and get a sense of, okay, this is my baseline, this is what I weighed pre and post, whatever. If the heat is more intense and you're sweating more, those are times where you might want to increase your hydration status and consider electrolyte replacements as well. All data points are on the table as far as I'm concerned. So if I work with an athlete that isn't supplementing, who is looking for something to just consider at home, yeah. If you're out exercising and you come home and your pee is dark yellow, that's a red flag. But especially B complex vitamins are going to influence the color of your urine because of the natural fluorescent color of B vitamins. So I wouldn't necessarily use it as a thing that's gauging your hydration status. A helpful tool to consider isn't necessarily the barometer that I would use as a nutritionist, but if you're at home looking at it, it can be a helpful tool. Yeah, so water intoxication is definitely a real thing, a real phenomenon. And I think this is where athletes, especially endurance athletes, marathon runners, drinking excessive water without replenishing those electrolytes is not necessarily a safe and effective way to hydrate. Guidance on that would include drinking to thirst, considering the color of your urine, especially if you're out racing, being mindful of the electrolytes. That's why you see that there are so many race tablets. And then if you're in a marathon, the support is going to include things like Gatorade or other electrolyte fueled drinks. And a lot of the race support fuel is going to include the sodium, the potassium, the magnesium, calcium chloride, all these different things, spacing out water intake. So this is where you don't necessarily want to chug a gallon of water. You might want to space it out so that your kidneys and your body and the blood filtration system has time to catch up with, on a cellular level, cells, the organ tissues, the organs, that homeostasis. Homeostasis doesn't want a gallon of water all at once. Your body isn't designed to filtrate that intake. So spacing out hydration is, I think, a helpful strategy. Underhydration tends to be more of an issue, although hypernatremia is definitely a reality. Generally speaking, through food, having an adequate amount of salt in your diet, so that's table salt, broth, electrolyte drinks, the recovery fuel. It depends. In some cases, I have clients who are much more food focused, looking to get adequate amounts through food. So in those cases, I might be developing dietary protocols tailored to focusing on certain foods like magnesium. But yeah, I definitely have clients that are benefiting from a therapeutic dose, which you can't get from food. You're not going to eat cups and cups and cups of pumpkin seeds. So there's definitely a time and a place for supplement protocols. And oftentimes I'm reviewing lab work And so we might be looking at addressing something based on lab values that are subclinically not ideal, because our healthcare system's a bit wonky. So sometimes people come to me saying like, my doctor said I'm fine, but I don't feel good. So part of my job is, okay, we have lab values. Let's look at these, because your labs might be telling a very compelling story, but none of it was outside of the full range. But these ranges don't consider like you as an individual necessarily. They're like a bell curve for our broader US population. So all to say that I definitely think there's cases for supplement protocols. It depends on the person. I don't think there's a lot of research to back that eggs are bad for cholesterol. When you look at eggs and when you look at certain foods and their cholesterol amount, eggs are high in dietary cholesterol. I think one egg has maybe close to about 200 milligrams of cholesterol, which is butting up against what the recommended daily cholesterol intake might be. But that misses a completely different point, which was the 1980s and the 1990s and the way that we understood nutrition and how it impacts our health. A lot of narratives came out saying like eggs are bad, and then that just got blown up in the media. I do not personally think there's a lot of research or data to back that eggs are going to be a significant influence on cholesterol status. So let me say that with this asterisk of, when I have a client that has high LDL cholesterol, the bad cholesterol, and low HDL cholesterol, the good cholesterol, or high triglycerides, or just a bad picture of like overall cholesterol, I am never starting with eggs. They probably have high cholesterol because they eat a lot of processed foods, or they have a familial hereditary predilection for it. So there are a lot of places that I would look for ways to fix hyperlipidemia before I would look at eggs. If I have a client that has like a total perfect picture of health and is like, I eat 8 eggs a day and their blood markers aren't good, well, in that case, I might look. So it's a really personalized answer, but I think what you're looking for is, are eggs bad? And my answer would be no. I think you can eat plenty of eggs every day and be totally fine. So I'll answer the first part. Are you going through it twice? No, but the dysregulation of your hormone profile means that month to month, you would not necessarily have the picture of normalcy that I talked about. When I work with clients with PCOS, there are a lot of nutritional strategies that I think those with endometriosis and PCOS can focus on. And some of the things that I talked about here were like that metabolic adaptation piece. So countering inflammation, supplement protocol. This would be a case where I might do some supplements to help with like insulin regulation, because we've seen that insulin response is dysregulated with polycystic ovary syndrome. And then, like I think PCOS is an example of these different hormonal phenotypes. So it's these different mappings of how your body and its, inner workings are responding to the environment, to the stress, to the nutrition. So anti-inflammatory foods, focusing on foods that are really supporting the gut health and really supporting that insulin regulation and supporting decreased levels of physiological stress are good starting points. And then also just understanding, like, I try to start from this place of validation, because a client who has any of these hormonal abnormalities has probably experienced some level of provider dismissal, unfortunately. They haven't gotten the answers they need. They have been told by a doctor, like, well, there's nothing that we can see that we can do to help you. So I think a big part of this is listening to the client's story and understanding what their experience has been, and then helping them find tailored strategies to help address whatever symptoms they're having relative to the hormonal dysregulation. Yes, there is so much to be said about perimenopause and menopause. I think the shortest thing I would say is like estrogen levels change drastically in the lead up to perimenopause. And we do not have enough information out there to really empower women yet the type of workout that you do and the type of food that you eat in the perimenopause, which can be 7 to 10 years. So the symptoms can feel really nebulous leading up to menopause, which is actually just this moment in time. Menopause is really the cessation of menstruation. And so that is when you stop. But the years leading up to the perimenopausal years leading up to that cessation can be supported through diets that are friendly, support estrogen, and that the support of estrogen-friendly foods is going to support all sorts of physiological functions, from the way that you feel to brain fog to vaginal dryness. So when I work with perimenopausal clients, that is a very real lens that we're looking at supporting their overall health and just like the experience of being a female in the world. Anti-inflammatory foods are kind of essential, especially for women that I work with that are training really hard in the years leading up to menopause. And the type of exercise you do, high intensity interval training, like true high intensity. So getting your heart rate up. I do a little bit of fitness consultation in my practice. And part of that is really helping my female clients understand how can you support decreasing estrogen levels in those perimenopausal years naturally. So one of the tools that you can use, obviously HRT and all these other medically supported tools can be part of it too. Unfortunately, perimenopause and menopause comes with a lot of confusion, lack of information, shame and judgment. So I try to pick those things apart in my practice and help clients feel like everything's on the table. What are we choosing that's right for you? Honestly, it can be late 30s, leading all the way up to mid to late 40s as well. What I don't typically do in my practice is like the day-to-day math of you worked out this much, so you should eat this much. And unfortunately, some of the fitness apps that I shared historically have done that a lot. Like my Fitness Pal used to be like, you exercised for 30 minutes, so you burn 350 calories. And then somehow that number is like tacked on for like, you get to eat those extra calories. I think it's like trying to play the stock market. Like you are not going to win if you're thinking about that sort of math. And in part because like anaerobic training, you aren't getting quite the same causative effect on caloric changes. Like when I deadlift and I do heavy squats, I don't know how many calories I'm burning, but then I have stimulated muscle protein synthesis. So I will be burning more calories in that window in my recovery phase and, going back to it. And that's part one of my answer. I'd say part two here is I think many, if not most of the women that I work with tends to be underfueling. It's a really unfortunate reality about being a female in this world is that like we are just inundated with information around calories, cutting calories. Performance is tied to these bigger pictures. And so when I think about this female profile, I think about low energy availability as it relates to performance and as it relates to that red S profile that I talked about. And even for clients that aren't falling all the way into deficiency, I do see a lot of females that tend to be underfueling, whether that's through the macros, like they're not getting enough protein. And we didn't get too much into the discussion of adequate protein, but I err on the side, just to give a number here, on like a gram per pound of ideal body weight. That's a lot. It's hard to get strictly through diet. So I help clients with like strategies and thinking about like, how do you get that much around just dietary intake? I'm saying yes, because I think most women tend to be underfueling for their activity level. This objective data does not say anything about your individual experience. So if I had a client who said, I feel fatigued and weak and more vulnerable during menstruation, that is true. It doesn't matter what the science says. I'm going to validate that experience and we are going to start from that place. So as a coach myself, one thing I would really guide any other coach towards is do your best to become educated about what the like big picture, biggest risk profile is, which tends to be low energy availability to someone's earlier question about like caloric fueling. A lot of the female athletes that I work with aren't getting enough fuel. And so that's the place that I think coaches can start at, inquiring, being curious about that, like allow us as females to help share our own experiences and validate that. I think just being educated is a good starting point, and that's partially through what information is out there, and partially through hearing from your female clients. Does your intake process talk about hormones at all, or menstrual cycles at all? And if it doesn't, that might be a worthwhile question just to prompt some openness from a female that has PCOS or endometriosis. For clients that have endometriosis, when they're, if they're bleeding, they might be in like severe pain, but they have learned to invalidate that pain because they've had to live with it and mute that pain. So I think there's a lot there that can be done. And I think it starts from a place of education and curiosity.